The sound of children's laughter is supposed to be pure, bright, innocent, the kind of sound that fills a room with light. But on that spring afternoon, laughter was replaced with screams. It happened fast. Too fast for anyone to understand what was unfolding. One moment, children in bright party hats were chasing balloons across the floor. The next, small bodies were collapsing onto the ground. Mothers clutched their sons and daughters, begging them to breathe, while fathers dialed frantically for help. The smell of frosting and sugar still hung in the air, sickeningly sweet, even as panic spread like fire through the hall. The cake sat in the center of it all, a pink and white tower, its candles still smoking, half-eaten slices scattered across paper plates. To anyone walking in, it looked like the centerpiece of a birthday celebration. But to the 19 children gasping for air, clutching their stomachs and turning pale, it was a weapon. In less than an hour, a birthday had turned into a mass funeral. And the woman who had baked that cake? She stood among the chaos, silent, watching her plan take root. But why? What drives someone to turn the most joyful moment of a child's life into a nightmare that would scar an entire community? What family secret could push her so far that 19 children would have to pay the price? This isn't just a story about poison hidden in frosting. It's a story about betrayal, revenge, and the darkness people can hide behind a smile. And by the time the truth came out, parents would never look at birthday cake the same way again. Before we go deeper into this chilling case, tell us in the comments, how would you react if you were at that party when the first child collapsed? And make sure to subscribe, because the disturbing details in this case are only just beginning. The birthday was meant to be simple. A rented community hall dressed in streamers and balloons, paper crowns for the kids, a clown hired to make balloon animals, tables lined with chips, soda bottles, and trays of homemade food. At the heart of it all sat the cake, 3 tiers, neatly frosted, decorated with bright sugar flowers and plastic figurines. It was the kind of cake that made children's eyes widen when it was carried into the room. Parents gathered around with cameras, waiting for the moment the candles would be lit and the little birthday girl would make her wish. The guests arrived in waves, cousins, classmates, neighbors. Children rushed to the dance floor while parents exchanged small talk about school, work, and the rising cost of living. It was an ordinary party, ordinary laughter, ordinary chatter. But not for her. She stood off to the side, blending into the crowd, unnoticed by most. The woman who had made the cake. To anyone else, it was a gesture of kindness. She had offered to bake it herself, a gift to the family. No one questioned it. Why would they? She had always been quiet, helpful, the type who never said no when asked for favors. What no one realized was that she had been waiting for this day. For years. Every detail was perfect. The frosting, the decorations, the placement of the cake in the middle of the table. Even the moment when the birthday song began, she had planned it down to that. Because she knew when the knife cut through the cake, when the first slices were handed to eager children, her revenge would finally be served. Parents clapped and sang, phones raised to capture the moment. The little girl leaned forward, eyes squeezed shut, making a wish no one would ever hear. She blew out the candles, the room erupted in cheers, and the knife sliced into the cake. And with that single cut, a nightmare was unleashed. The community hall that day was filled with the Kowalski family and their closest friends. 8-year-old Emilia Kowalski bounced around in her princess dress, her dark curls bouncing with every step. The walls echoed with Polish and English mixed together, grandparents calling out blessings, parents shouting reminders to wash hands before eating. The woman responsible for the horror stood near the gift table. Her name was Berenice Volkov. 53 years old, unmarried, childless. She wore a simple floral dress and sensible shoes, the kind of outfit that made her disappear into any crowd. Her graying hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she carried herself with the practiced invisibility of someone who had spent decades being overlooked. But her eyes were watching everything. Every child who ran past, every parent who smiled, every moment of joy that filled the room, because none of them knew what she knew. None of them remembered what they had done to her. Berenice Volkov hadn't always been invisible. 23 years earlier, she had been the Kowalski family's lifeline. When Antoni Kowalski immigrated from Poland with nothing but a suitcase and broken English, Berenice was the neighbor who translated documents, helped him find work, and introduced him to the community. When his wife Katarzyna arrived 6 months later, pregnant and terrified, Berenice held her hand through doctor's appointments and taught her how to navigate American grocery stores. For 3 years, Berenice was family. She was the godmother at little Tomasz's baptism. She was the emergency contact on school forms. She was the one who watched the children when Antoni worked double shifts at the factory. But then came the night that changed everything. It was a cold February evening in 2001. Antoni had been drinking, more than usual. The stress of providing for his growing family, the language barrier at work, the weight of being responsible for everyone's survival in a new country. It was crushing him. Katarzyna was 7 months pregnant with their third child, and the small apartment felt smaller every day. The fight started over money, bills piling up, rent overdue, Antoni's paycheck barely covering groceries, but it escalated into something darker. Berenice heard the shouting through the thin walls. She heard Katarzyna crying. She heard the sound of something breaking. When she knocked on their door, Antoni answered with blood on his knuckles and rage in his eyes. Behind him, Katarzyna sat on the floor, holding her belly, tears streaming down her face. "Call police," Katarzyna whispered in broken English. "Please." But when the officers arrived, everything changed. Antoni sobered up fast. He spoke to the police in his best English, explaining that it was a misunderstanding, a cultural difference, that his pregnant wife was emotional and had overreacted to a simple argument. He was charming, apologetic, the picture of a hard-working immigrant who just wanted to provide for his family. The officers looked at Berenice. They looked at Katarzyna, who had stopped crying and now stared at the floor in silence. They looked around the small apartment, noting the broken picture frame, but no visible injuries on anyone. "Ma'am, do you want to press charges?" one officer asked Katarzyna. Katarzyna looked at Antoni, then at Berenice, then back at the floor. "No," she said quietly, "is okay, is misunderstanding." But it wasn't okay, and Berenice knew it. Over the next 3 months, the bruises appeared and disappeared, always in places that clothing would cover, always with explanations that sounded reasonable. A fall downstairs, walking into a door, clumsy pregnancy movements. Berenice tried to talk to Katarzyna, but every conversation ended the same way. Denials, excuses, fear disguised as loyalty. Then came the night Katarzyna went into labor 2 weeks early. Berenice drove her to the hospital while Antoni was at work. She held Katarzyna's hand through the contractions, translated for the doctors, and promised that everything would be fine. When baby Amelia was born, tiny, perfect, screaming with healthy lungs, Berenice felt like she was holding her own grandchild. But the next morning everything fell apart. A social worker arrived at the hospital. Someone had called in a report about domestic violence in the Kowalski home. The hospital staff had noticed old bruising on Katarzyna's body during delivery. Child Protective Services needed to investigate before the family could take the baby home. Antoni arrived at the hospital like a hurricane. He demanded to know who had made the call, who had involved the authorities, who was trying to destroy his family. All eyes turned to Berenice. "You," Antoni said, his voice shaking with rage. "You called them." Berenice opened her mouth to explain, to defend herself, to tell the truth, that she had never called anyone, that she had kept their secrets even when it tore her apart inside, that she had only ever tried to help. But before she could speak, Katarzyna looked up from the hospital bed, looked her straight in the eye, and nodded. "Yes," Katarzyna said quietly. She called them. The lie hit Berenice like a physical blow. After everything she had done for this family, after all the time she had covered for Antoni, had helped them navigate crises, had loved their children as her own, they were throwing her under the bus to save themselves. The investigation lasted 3 weeks. During that time, the Kowalski family painted Berenice as an unstable neighbor who was obsessed with their family. They told caseworkers that she had tried to insert herself into their lives, had made inappropriate comments about taking their children, had threatened to call authorities when they tried to maintain boundaries. They described her as a lonely, childless woman who had fixated on their family because she couldn't have children of her own. They said she had been watching them, following them, making them uncomfortable for months. Every lie was delivered with perfect conviction. Every story was corroborated by family members who had never even met Berenice. Every piece of evidence pointed to a woman who had crossed lines and needed to be kept away from children. The worst part wasn't the investigation. It was what happened after. The story spread through their small Polish-American community like wildfire. The woman who had called child services on a new immigrant family. The woman who had tried to get their children taken away. The woman who was clearly disturbed, obsessed, dangerous. Berenice lost her job at the local Catholic school, where she had worked as a secretary for 8 years. Parents complained that they didn't feel comfortable with her around their children. The principal, apologetic but firm, suggested she find work elsewhere. She lost her friends one by one. Social invitations stopped coming. Phone calls weren't returned. At church, people whispered and stared. Some crossed themselves when she walked past, as if she carried some kind of curse. But the cruelest blow was personal. For years, Berenice had been dating Stanisław Nowak, a widower who owned a small repair shop downtown. They had talked about marriage, about the possibility of adopting children together, about building the family Berenice had always wanted but had never been able to have due to medical complications. 3 days after the investigation concluded, Stanisław broke up with her. "I can't be with someone who would hurt children," he said, unable to meet her eyes. "I have grandchildren. I have to think about them." "But I didn't," Berenice started. "Everyone knows what you did," Stanisław interrupted. "The whole community knows. I can't risk it." And just like that, her future disappeared. Her chance at marriage, at stepchildren, at the family she had dreamed of since childhood, gone. The Kowalski family got their baby back. The case was closed. Antoni got counseling for anger management and alcohol abuse. They moved to a bigger apartment across town. They rebuilt their lives. And Berenice was left with nothing but the truth that no one believed and a rage that grew deeper every day. She started writing their names down. Antoni, Katarzyna, Tomasz, baby Amelia. Every family member who had lied for them. Every friend who had supported their story. Every person who had abandoned her based on their word. At first, it was just a way to remember, to process, to make sense of how her life had been destroyed by people she had loved like family. But as the years passed, the list became something else. A reminder, a promise, a plan. She watched them from afar. She saw Antoni get promoted at the factory. She saw Katarzyna learn English, get a job at a grocery store, buy a car. She saw their children grow up, make friends, join school sports teams, live the American dream that Berenice had helped make possible. And every milestone, every achievement, every moment of happiness they experienced felt like salt in a wound that never healed. But she also saw something else. The bruises never fully went away. Katarzyna still flinched when Antoni raised his voice. The children learned to disappear when their father came home in a bad mood. The family that had painted Berenice as the threat lived every day with the real monster in their house. And somehow, that made it worse. Because she could have helped. She should have been there to protect those children, to support Katarzyna, to be the safety net she had always been. Instead, she was the enemy. The cautionary tale. The woman whose name was whispered as a warning. For 23 years, she lived with that rage. She moved to a small apartment on the other side of town, found work cleaning office buildings at night, a job where she would never have to interact with families or children. She became a ghost, invisible and forgotten. But she never forgot them. And when the invitation to Amelia's 8th birthday party arrived in her mailbox, forwarded from her old address, probably sent by mistake, she saw it as a sign. It was time to stop being invisible. Saturday morning, 9:47 a.m. Berenice stood in her kitchen, staring at the ingredients laid out across her counter. Flour, sugar, eggs, butter. The normal components of any birthday cake. But tucked behind the baking powder, in an unmarked glass vial, sat something else entirely. Ricin, extracted from castor beans over months of careful preparation, odorless, tasteless, and deadly in even tiny amounts. She had researched every method, every poison, every way to ensure maximum impact with minimal detection. Ricin was perfect. It would take hours to show symptoms, giving her time to disappear. It would look like food poisoning at first, buying even more time. And by the time doctors figured out what they were dealing with, it would be too late for most of the victims. The recipe called for 3 cups of flour. She measured carefully, her hands steady. Then, with the precision of a pharmacist, she added 1/4 teaspoon of the ricin powder, mixed it in slowly, ensuring even distribution. 23 years of rage went into that mixing bowl. Saturday afternoon, 2:30 p.m. The community hall buzzed with activity as families arrived for Emilia's party. Berenice carried the cake carefully, wrapped in her grandmother's lace tablecloth. The weight of it felt heavier than it should have, as if the malice baked inside had given it extra substance. "Berenice!" Katarzyna's voice made her freeze. After all these years, hearing her name spoken by the woman who had destroyed her life sent ice through her veins. "You came," Katarzyna continued, approaching with a nervous smile. "I wasn't sure if you got the invitation. We moved so many times." Up close, Katarzyna looked older than her 46 years. Lines around her eyes, grey threading through her dark hair. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and she kept glancing over her shoulder toward where Antoni stood with other fathers. "I wouldn't miss Emilia's birthday," Berenice said quietly. "I brought cake. You didn't have to. I wanted to." Berenice's voice was steady, emotionless. "Where should I put it?" Katarzyna led her to the dessert table, chattering nervously about the party preparations, the cost of the hall rental, how much Emilia had grown. Berenice wasn't listening. She was watching the children, 19 of them ranging from age 6 to 12, Emilia's classmates, cousins, neighbors, beautiful children with bright eyes and easy laughter, running around in party clothes, playing games, living the carefree childhood that every child deserved. Children who had no idea what adults were capable of when pushed too far. As she set the cake down in the center of the table, Berenice felt a moment of something that might have been doubt. These children had done nothing wrong. They were innocent in all of this. But then she saw him, Antoni, throwing his head back in laughter at something another father had said. The same laugh she remembered from 23 years ago, when he charmed the police officers, when he convinced everyone that she was the problem. The doubt disappeared. Saturday afternoon, 4:15 p.m. "Time for cake," Katarzyna announced, clapping her hands to get everyone's attention. The children rushed to the table, pushing gently for the best view. Parents gathered around with phones and cameras, ready to capture the moment. Berenice positioned herself at the edge of the crowd, close enough to watch but far enough away to avoid the photos. She had dressed carefully for today, a forgettable outfit that would help her blend into any crowd. When the investigation started, witnesses would struggle to remember her clearly. Emilia stood in front of the cake, her face glowing with excitement. She had grown into a beautiful 8-year-old, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. For a moment, looking at her, Berenice remembered the tiny baby she had helped bring into the world, the baby she had held minutes after birth, whispering Polish lullabies her own grandmother had sung to her. "Make a wish, Kochani," Katarzyna whispered, using the Polish endearment for sweetheart. Emilia closed her eyes tight, took a deep breath, and blew out all 8 candles in one try. The crowd cheered. She grinned and clapped her hands, bouncing on her toes with pure joy. Antoni stepped forward with the knife. "Who wants the first piece?" he called out. Every child's hand shot up. "Me! Me! Me!" He laughed, that same laugh that haunted Berenice's nightmares, and began cutting generous slices. The cake was beautiful inside, layers of vanilla sponge with strawberry filling, just like any normal birthday cake. Nothing about it suggested the horror it contained. The first slice went to Amelia, of course. She bit into it immediately, frosting smearing across her cheek. "It's so good," she announced, and the other children pressed forward eagerly for their portions. Berenice watched each slice being distributed, watched each child take their first bite, watched the joy on their faces as they tasted what they thought was just cake. In approximately 2 hours, that joy would turn to agony. Saturday afternoon, 4:32 p.m. The party continued around the edges of disaster. Children played musical chairs while parents socialized. The clown arrived and began making balloon animals, drawing delighted squeals from his audience. The cake was nearly gone, with only a few pieces remaining on the table. Berenice checked her watch. The ricin would take time to work, anywhere from 2 to 6 hours before symptoms appeared. She had maybe an hour before she needed to leave to avoid suspicion. She moved through the party like a ghost, making small talk when necessary, but mostly observing, committing faces to memory, watching the children laugh and play, knowing that for many of them, these were their last carefree moments. Young Tomasz Kowalski, now 26, had brought his own 3-year-old son to the party. The little boy had been too young for cake, but had licked frosting off his cousin's plate. Berenice felt a stab of something, not quite guilt, but acknowledgement that her revenge was about to reach beyond the original family. But it was too late for regrets. The poison was already working its way through their systems, binding to their cells, beginning the slow process of shutting down their bodies. Saturday afternoon, 5:45 p.m. "I should go," Berenice told Katarzyna, appearing at her elbow with practiced suddenness. "Thank you for including me." Katarzyna looked surprised. "So early? The party doesn't end until 7. "I have things to do at home." Berenice kept her voice neutral. "Tell Emilia I said happy birthday." She walked toward the exit, moving at a normal pace. Not too fast, not too slow. Just a middle-aged woman leaving a children's party at a reasonable time. Behind her, the laughter continued. Children played games, parents chatted about work and weather. The normalcy of it all felt surreal, knowing what was coming. As she reached her car, Berenice allowed herself one look back at the community hall. Through the windows, she could see the bright decorations, the moving figures of families enjoying a Saturday afternoon together. In less than 2 hours, that same hall would be filled with screams. She drove home carefully, observing every traffic law. In her apartment, she changed clothes, putting everything she had worn into a garbage bag to be disposed of later. She showered thoroughly, washing away any trace of the party, any microscopic evidence that might connect her to what was about to happen. Then she sat in her living room and waited. Saturday evening, 6:23 p.m. The first child to show symptoms was 7-year-old Jakub Nowicki, Stanisław's grandson, the boy who shared a name with the man who had abandoned Berenice 23 years ago. It started with stomach cramps. Jakub doubled over during a game of freeze dance, clutching his belly and whimpering. His mother Maria knelt beside him, feeling his forehead for fever. "Maybe too much cake," she murmured, not yet alarmed. But within minutes, 3 more children were complaining of stomach pain. Then nausea. Then vomiting. Saturday evening, 6:41 p.m. The party came to a halt as more children began collapsing. What had started as isolated incidents became a clear pattern. Every child who had eaten the cake was getting sick, and they were getting sick fast. Emilia was the worst. The birthday girl who had eaten the largest piece was now curled on the floor, vomiting blood, her skin turning grey. Her mother knelt beside her, screaming her name, begging her to stay awake. Parents called 911 from their cell phones, voices overlapping in panic. The community hall's single landline was busy constantly. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance. Antoni stood frozen by the dessert table, staring at the remaining pieces of cake. "The cake," he whispered. "Something's wrong with the cake." But it was too late for that realization to help anyone. Saturday evening, 7:12 p.m. The first ambulance arrived, then a second, then a third. Paramedics rushed into the hall to find a scene from a nightmare. 19 children in various stages of poisoning, ranging from severe nausea to complete collapse. Parents crying, screaming, demanding answers that no one could give. The remaining cake was immediately secured as evidence. The hall was evacuated, except for the medical personnel and the sickest children who couldn't be moved safely. Emilia Kowalski was the first to be loaded into an ambulance, her small body convulsing as paramedics worked to stabilize her. Her parents rode with her, Katarzyna holding her daughter's hand and praying in Polish, while Antoni stared out the window in shock. By 7:30 p.m., every ambulance in the county was involved in transporting children to hospitals. The birthday party that had started with laughter and balloon animals had become the largest mass poisoning incident in the state's history. Saturday evening, 8:45 p.m. Berenice sat in her apartment, listening to the sirens screaming past her window. The local news had picked up the story. Breaking news: mass poisoning at children's birthday party. She watched the coverage with the same detached interest she might give to a movie. Reporters stood outside the hospital, interviewing distraught parents. The camera showed ambulances still arriving, their red and blue lights painting the building in emergency colors. A police spokesperson promised a full investigation, though they admitted they had no suspects at this time. No suspects. Of course they didn't. Who would suspect the quiet woman who had baked the cake as a gift? Who would think to connect this tragedy to a 23-year-old injustice? She had planned this perfectly. And now, finally, the Kowalski family was experiencing the same helplessness she had felt when her life was destroyed. They were learning what it felt like to watch something precious slip away, while being powerless to stop it. Sunday morning, 3:17 a.m. The first death occurred just after 3 in the morning. 6-year-old Maya Kowalski, Emilia's youngest cousin, succumbed to organ failure despite every effort to save her. She died holding her mother's hand, her last words asking for water because her throat burned. By dawn, 2 more children had died. 5 others were in critical condition, their organs shutting down as the ricin completed its deadly work. The remaining children were stable, but would require weeks of treatment and years of recovery. The medical staff worked frantically, but ricin poisoning was notoriously difficult to treat. There was no antidote, no way to reverse the damage once the poison had bonded to the body's cells. All they could do was provide supportive care and hope that the children's young, healthy bodies could fight off the assault. But for 3 families, hope wasn't enough. Sunday morning, 8:30 a.m. Berenice woke to pounding on her door. Through the peephole, she saw 2 police officers and a detective in plain clothes. Her heart rate increased, but her expression remained calm as she opened the door. "Ms. Volkov, I'm Detective Reynolds. We'd like to ask you a few questions about yesterday's incident." She invited them in, offered coffee, played the role of helpful citizen perfectly. Yes, she had been at the party. Yes, she had made the cake. No, she couldn't imagine how something like this could happen. "We understand you had some difficulties with the family in the past," Detective Reynolds said carefully. Berenice nodded, her face showing appropriate sadness. "That was a long time ago? A misunderstanding? I've always cared about those children." The detective made notes, but she could see that she wasn't their primary suspect. Not yet. They were still thinking in terms of accidental contamination, product tampering, or perhaps a disgruntled caterer or food service worker. They didn't yet understand that this was personal, but that wouldn't last long. Someone would remember the old scandal. Someone would start asking questions about why Berenice had been at the party at all, why she had insisted on making the cake, why she had left early. She estimated she had maybe 24 hours before they came back with handcuffs instead of questions. It was enough time to finish what she had started. Sunday evening, 6:45 p.m. Detective Sarah Reynolds sat at her desk, surrounded by witness statements, lab reports, and crime scene photos. The ricin had been confirmed within hours, a sophisticated poison that required knowledge, planning, and access to specialized materials. This wasn't a random act or accidental contamination. Someone had deliberately poisoned 19 children. The thought made her sick. In 22 years of police work, Reynolds had seen plenty of horrible things, but targeting children at a birthday party crossed a line that most criminals wouldn't even consider. She spread the witness statements across her desk, looking for patterns. 37 adults had attended the party, 19 children. All of the children who ate cake got sick. None of the adults who ate cake showed symptoms, suggesting the poison had been concentrated in specific portions or layers. But one name kept coming up in the statements: Berenice Volkov, the woman who made the cake. Several witnesses mentioned that she had been insistent about providing it, that she had arrived early to set it up personally, that she had left before the symptoms started. Reynolds pulled up Berenice's background check. 53 years old, no criminal history, worked nights cleaning office buildings. But buried in her file was a CPS report from 2001, an investigation involving the Kowalski family, the same family whose daughter's birthday party had been turned into a massacre. "Martinez," Reynolds called to her partner, "I need everything we can find on Berenice Volkov and her connection to the Kowalskis. Go back 25 years if you have to." Monday morning, 7:30 a.m. The fourth child died overnight. 8-year-old Philip Kowalski, Amelia's second cousin. He had eaten 2 pieces of cake going back for seconds because he loved strawberry frosting. His organs failed despite dialysis and every medical intervention available. The hospital had become a war zone, families camping in waiting rooms, parents taking turns at bedsides, grandparents praying in multiple languages. The media circus outside grew larger each hour, with national news crews joining the local reporters. Inside room 314, Emilia Kowalski lay connected to machines that breathed for her and filtered her blood. Her parents hadn't left her side in 48 hours. Katarzyna held her daughter's hand and whispered stories, while Antoni stared at the monitors, willing the numbers to improve. "She's fighting," the doctor told them during morning rounds. "Her youth is working in her favor, but the next 24 hours are critical." Katarzyna nodded without looking away from her daughter's face. "She's strong. She's always been strong." But privately, she wondered if strength would be enough against whatever monster had done this to innocent children. Monday afternoon, 2:15 p.m. Detective Reynolds knocked on Berenice Volkov's door for the second time in 2 days. This time, she wasn't alone. 4 officers surrounded the building while forensic specialists waited in a van across the street. Berenice answered the door calmly, as if she had been expecting them. "Ms. Volkov, you're under arrest for the murder of Maya Kowalski, Filip Kowalski, and Jakub Nowicki, and the attempted murder of 16 others." She didn't resist. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She simply extended her hands for the handcuffs and walked to the police car with the dignity of someone who had finally completed a long and difficult task. As they drove away, neighbors gathered on their porches and sidewalks, whispering among themselves. The quiet woman who had lived among them for decades, who had seemed so ordinary, so forgettable, was now the most notorious criminal in the state. Monday afternoon, 4:30 p.m. The search of Berenice's apartment yielded a treasure trove of evidence that painted a picture of obsession spanning more than 2 decades. In her bedroom closet, investigators found boxes of newspaper clippings about the Kowalski family, school photos, wedding announcements, birth notices, job promotions. She had been tracking their lives for years. But the most chilling discovery was in her kitchen drawer, a notebook filled with detailed plans for the party, floor layouts of the community hall, lists of likely attendees, calculations about poison distribution and dosage. And on the last page, written in her careful handwriting, "They will understand what it feels like to lose everything." In her bathroom medicine cabinet, they found empty vials that had contained castor beans and the equipment she had used to extract ricin. She had been preparing for months, possibly years. Detective Reynolds flipped through the notebook, reading the meticulous planning that had gone into targeting children. "Jesus Christ," she murmured. She planned this down to the minute. Monday evening, 7:00 p.m. The interrogation room was small, windowless, and deliberately uncomfortable. Berenice sat across from Detective Reynolds and District Attorney Michael Chang, her hands folded in her lap, her expression serene. "Do you understand why you're here, Ms. Volkov?" Chang asked. "I understand perfectly. 3 children are dead. 16 others are fighting for their lives. Do you have anything to say about that?" Berenice was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. Those children were innocent. I want that understood. I never wanted to hurt innocent children. But you did hurt them. You poisoned them. I wanted to hurt the people who destroyed my life, the children. She paused, something flickering across her face that might have been regret. The children were a way to make sure they felt what I felt. Complete helplessness. Reynolds leaned forward. Tell us about 2001. Tell us what happened with the Kowalski family. And she did. For 3 hours, Berenice told them everything. The years of helping the family, the domestic violence she witnessed, the night she tried to help, and the betrayal that followed. She spoke without emotion, reciting facts like she was reading from a grocery list. They let everyone believe I was a monster who wanted to steal their children. They destroyed my reputation, my career, my chance at having a family of my own. They made me disappear. So you decided to make their children disappear? Chang asked. I decided to make them understand what loss feels like. What it's like to watch something precious slip away while everyone around you does nothing to help. The confession was detailed, unrepentant, and legally airtight. Berenice admitted to planning the attack, acquiring the poison, and carrying out the murders. She showed no remorse for the children who died, only anger that it had taken 23 years to balance the scales. Do you understand that you're going to prison for the rest of your life? Reynolds asked. I understand. But they'll never forget what I did. Every birthday party, every celebration, every moment of joy they try to have, they'll remember. They'll know that happiness can disappear in an instant, just like mine did. She smiled for the first time since her arrest. It was a cold, satisfied smile that made both investigators' skin crawl. Justice, she said quietly. After 23 years, finally justice. Tuesday morning, 9:15 a.m. The fifth child died during the night, 7-year-old Anya Kowalski, whose only crime had been wanting a big piece of birthday cake. Her parents had been told she was improving, that her kidneys were responding to treatment. But ricin is merciless. At 3:47 a.m., her small body finally surrendered to the poison that had been eating away at her cells for 3 days. The hospital corridor filled with wailing that echoed off the sterile walls. Anya's mother collapsed when the doctor delivered the news, her legs simply giving out beneath her. Her father caught her, and they held each other in the hallway, crying for the daughter who would never grow up, never graduate, never have children of her own. 5 dead children. 14 still fighting. An entire community traumatized beyond repair. At the police station, when Detective Reynolds informed Berenice of the 5th death, the woman showed no reaction. She simply nodded as if confirming an expected delivery. 5 wasn't the goal, Berenice said calmly. The goal was for them to understand loss. Mission accomplished. Tuesday afternoon, 3:20 p.m. The media had descended on the small town like vultures. News vans lined every street near the hospital and police station. Reporters thrust microphones at grieving families, demanding statements, asking how it felt to lose a child to such senseless violence. CNN, Fox News, NBC, they all led with the same story. Birthday party massacre. The cake of death. Woman's 23-year revenge plot kills 5 children. Berenice's photograph was everywhere. The quiet, forgettable woman had become the face of unthinkable evil. Experts debated her psychology on talk shows. Former neighbors gave interviews about how normal she had seemed. The story had everything the media loved: innocent victims, a clear villain, and a motive that felt both understandable and absolutely insane. But for the families in the hospital, the circus felt like another violation. Their private grief had become public entertainment. We just want to be left alone to say goodbye to our children, Tomasz Kowalski told reporters outside the hospital. Please, just let us grieve. Wednesday morning, 6:45 a.m. Emilia Kowalski's condition worsened overnight. The machines keeping her alive were working harder, her kidneys were failing despite dialysis, and her brain activity had decreased significantly. Her parents were faced with a decision no parent should ever have to make. Dr. Patricia Williams sat with Antoni and Katarzyna in a small conference room, speaking in the gentle tone reserved for delivering impossible news. Her organs are shutting down. The poison has caused too much damage. We can keep the machines running, but her brain function is minimal. She's not going to recover." Katarzyna's hand flew to her mouth. "No, no, she's fighting. You said she was fighting." "She fought as hard as she could, but sometimes fighting isn't enough." Antoni stared at the table, his voice hollow when he finally spoke. "How long?" "With the machines, we could keep her body functioning indefinitely. But she's not really there anymore. The decision is yours, but if it were my daughter, I would let her go peacefully." The room fell silent except for the sound of Katarzyna sobbing. Wednesday evening, 8:30 p.m. As word spread that Emilia was dying, something unexpected happened. The community that had once shunned Berenice Volkov began to remember the woman she had been before the scandal, before the lies, before the rage consumed her. Mrs. Elena Kowalski, Antoni's elderly mother, sat beside reporters at a press conference organized by the family's lawyer. Her voice shook as she spoke, but her words were clear. "I want people to know the truth about what happened 23 years ago. We lied. We destroyed that woman's life to protect my son. We made her the villain when she was trying to help us." The admission sent shockwaves through the assembled media. This wasn't just a story about a woman who snapped and killed children. This was about what happens when injustice festers for decades, when lies compound into something monstrous. "My son was drinking too much. He was hitting his wife. Berenice saw it and tried to help, but when the police came, we blamed her instead of taking responsibility. We told everyone she was crazy, that she was obsessed with our family. We ruined her life." Elena's confession continued for 20 minutes, detailing the systematic destruction of Berenice's reputation. How the family had convinced neighbors that she was unstable. How they had cost her job, her relationship, her chance at happiness. "I'm not saying what she did was right. Those children, my God, those beautiful children," Eleanor broke down, unable to continue for several minutes. "But we created this monster. We turned a good woman into something terrible, and now we're all paying the price." Thursday morning, 11:02 a.m. Berenice watched Elena's confession on the jail's television with the same detached interest she had shown throughout her arrest and questioning. When it was over, she turned to Detective Reynolds, who had come to inform her of the latest developments. "Does that make you feel vindicated?" Reynolds asked, "knowing that your side of the story is finally being told?" "It's too late for vindication," Berenice replied. 23 years too late. "But you got what you wanted. The truth is out. People know what they did to you." Berenice considered this. "I didn't do this for public vindication. I did it so they would understand what it feels like to lose everything that matters. Elena's confession doesn't bring back their dead children." Reynolds studied the woman across from her. Even now, even with 5 children dead and more dying, Berenice showed no remorse. The capacity for empathy that might once have existed in her had been burned away by decades of anger. "The other families," Reynolds said. "The children who died weren't all Kowalskis. Some of them were just friends, neighbors, innocent kids who happened to be at the wrong party." For the first time, something flickered across Berenice's face, a shadow of what might have been regret. "Collateral damage," she said quietly. "In war, there's always collateral damage. This wasn't war, this was murder. This was justice, delayed, but justice nonetheless." Thursday evening, 7:45 p.m. At 7:45 p.m., surrounded by her parents, grandparents, and extended family, Emilia Kowalski died. She was 8 years old, one day past her birthday, and the 6th victim of a woman's quest for revenge. The machines that had kept her alive were turned off at her parents' request. Katarzyna held her daughter's hand as her heart stopped beating, whispering the same Polish lullabies that Berenice had sung to her on the day she was born. Antoni stood at the window looking out at the parking lot where news vans waited like hungry predators. His daughter was gone, his family was destroyed, and somewhere in a jail cell, the woman responsible was probably sleeping peacefully. "I want to see her," he said suddenly. "Antoni, no," Katarzyna whispered. "Don't do that to yourself. I need to look her in the eye. I need to understand how someone could do this." But the truth was, He already understood. Berenice Volkov had become exactly what they had made her, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain from their destruction. Friday morning, 10:30 a.m. The news of Amelia's death broke like a thunderclap across the nation. 6 children dead from a birthday party poisoning. The death toll was climbing toward what experts called the worst domestic terrorism attack involving children in modern American history. But the media narrative was shifting. Elena Kowalski's confession had complicated the story. This wasn't just about a crazy woman who snapped. This was about decades of injustice that had metastasized into unspeakable tragedy. Protesters gathered outside the jail where Berenice was being held. Some called for her immediate execution. Others held signs reading, "Justice delayed is justice denied," and "What creates a monster?" Dr. Amanda Chen, a forensic psychologist, was interviewed on every major network. "We're seeing what happens when trauma and injustice are left to fester for decades." Berenice Volkov didn't become a killer overnight. She was systematically destroyed by people she trusted and then abandoned by a community that should have protected her. "Are you defending what she did?" asked the CNN anchor. "Absolutely not. 6 children are dead because of her actions. But if we want to prevent this from happening again, we need to understand how someone becomes capable of such horror. And the answer isn't just individual pathology, it's systemic failure." Friday afternoon, 2:15 p.m. The remaining 14 children were finally stable, though their recovery would take months and their trauma would last a lifetime. 8-year-old Kacper Nowak, Stanisław's great-nephew, was among the survivors. He had eaten only a small piece of cake, enough to make him violently ill but not enough to kill him. His parents brought him to the jail for a victim impact statement, something the district attorney hoped would help Berenice understand the full scope of her actions. Through the protective glass, Kacper looked at the woman who had tried to kill him. He was still pale, still weak, but his voice was clear when he spoke. "Why did you want to hurt us? We didn't do anything to you." Berenice stared at the boy for a long moment. Something in his face, the innocence, the genuine confusion, seemed to crack something inside her that had been frozen for years. "You're right," she said quietly. "You didn't do anything to me." "Then why?" She opened her mouth to explain about justice, about balance, about making people understand loss. But looking at this child, this surviving victim of her revenge, the words felt hollow. "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought I knew, but I don't know." It was the closest thing to an apology any of the victims would ever get from her. Monday morning, 9:01 a.m. The funeral for the 6 children was held at St. Stanislaw's Catholic Church, the same church where Berenice had once worshipped, where she had been baptized as an infant, where she had dreamed of one day having her own children blessed. The church was packed beyond capacity. Families from across the country had come to pay their respects. The tiny coffins, lined up in front of the altar, represented not just 6 young lives cut short, but the complete moral collapse of a community that had failed to protect its most vulnerable members. Father Michael Kowalski, Antoni's cousin, delivered the homily. He spoke about forgiveness, about justice, about the cycle of violence that can consume entire communities when healing is replaced with revenge. We are gathered here today not just to mourn these children, but to confront our own failures. We failed Berenice Volkov 23 years ago. We failed to seek truth, to demand justice, to protect someone who needed our help. And our failure created a monster that ultimately devoured our children. The words hung in the air like incense. Some parishioners nodded in agreement, others shifted uncomfortably, not ready to accept their role in the tragedy. Today we bury not just 6 beautiful children, but also the illusion that we can destroy someone's life without consequences, that we can abandon the vulnerable without creating dangerous enemies, that we can choose comfortable lies over difficult truths. As the funeral procession made its way to the cemetery, Berenice watched from her jail cell window. The building was close enough that she could see the long line of black cars, the crowds of mourners, the media coverage of the devastation she had caused. For the first time since her arrest, she cried. The trial of Berenice Volkov lasted 3 weeks and dominated national news coverage. The prosecution presented a straightforward case: premeditated murder of 6 children and attempted murder of 13 others. The evidence was overwhelming, the confession was complete, and the outcome was never in doubt. The defense didn't try to argue innocence. Instead, they painted a picture of systematic abuse by a community that had scapegoated an innocent woman and then abandoned her to a life of isolation and rage. They called expert witnesses who testified about the psychological effects of prolonged injustice, about how trauma can metastasize into violence when left untreated. But in the end, no amount of context could excuse the murder of children. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Judge Harrison sentenced Berenice to life in prison without the possibility of parole, followed by 6 consecutive life sentences. "Your actions represent evil in its purest form," the judge said during sentencing. "Whatever injustices you suffered do not justify the slaughter of innocent children. You will spend the rest of your life behind bars, and when you die you will be remembered only as the woman who poisoned children at a birthday party." Berenice listened to the sentence without emotion. When asked if she had any final words, she stood and faced the families of her victims. "I'm not going to ask for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm not going to claim I was justified because I wasn't. I killed your children to hurt their parents, and that makes me a monster." She paused, looking specifically at Katarzyna and Antoni Kowalski. "But I want you to remember that monsters aren't born. They're made. And you made me." It was the last public statement she would ever make. The Riverside Community Center, where Emilia's birthday party was held, was demolished 6 months after the trial. The building had become a shrine for the victims, but also a reminder of trauma that the community couldn't heal from. In its place, they built a memorial garden with 6 small trees, one for each child who died. The Kowalski family moved away, unable to live in a place where every street corner held memories of their daughter and their past mistakes. Antoni and Katarzyna divorced 18 months after Emilia's death, their marriage unable to survive the weight of grief and guilt. The surviving children recovered physically, but many struggled with PTSD, anxiety, and trust issues that would follow them into adulthood. Several families moved away. Others stayed, but found that birthday parties, community gatherings, and even shared meals triggered panic attacks and flashbacks. Dr. Sarah Martinez, who had treated several of the victims, published a study about the long-term effects of mass poisoning on children. "The physical recovery is just the beginning," she wrote. "These children will live with the knowledge that someone tried to kill them for the rest of their lives. That changes how you see the world." Berenice Volkov, now 58, sits in a maximum security women's prison in upstate New York. She spends her days in solitary confinement, reading library books and writing letters that are never sent. Her cell is sparse but clean. A narrow bed, a metal toilet, a small desk where she writes. On the wall, she has taped a newspaper clipping from Elena Kowalski's confession. The moment when the truth about what happened 23 years ago finally came to light. She has been interviewed by psychologists, criminologists, and journalists, all trying to understand how someone becomes capable of killing children. But she rarely speaks about her crimes anymore. When she does talk, it's usually about the children she taught at the Catholic school, before her life fell apart, before she became the villain in someone else's story. Prison guards say she's a model inmate. Quiet, compliant, no trouble. She doesn't receive visitors. No family, no friends. No one from her former life wants anything to do with her. She exists in the liminal space between life and death, breathing but not really living, surviving but not thriving. Sometimes, late at night, she dreams about Emilia's baptism, about holding that tiny baby and feeling for a moment like she was part of something beautiful. In her dreams, she's still the woman who helped families instead of destroying them, the woman who protected children instead of poisoning them. But she always wakes up in the same cell, serving the same sentence, paying the same price for a revenge that tasted like ashes the moment it was complete. Call to action number 2. We're only halfway through understanding this devastating case. Hit that like button if you're still processing this nightmare, and tell us in the comments, do you think Berenice was born evil Or was she created by the very people she destroyed? The psychology behind this case gets even darker from here. The story of Berenice Volkov and the birthday party massacre forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about justice, revenge, and the price of abandoned humanity. 6 children died not because they were guilty of anything, but because the adults in their lives, both their families and their community, chose comfortable lies over difficult truths. The same people who destroyed Berenice's life then forgot about her, assuming that injustice buried deep enough would stay buried forever. But injustice doesn't disappear. It metastasizes. It grows in dark places, fed by isolation and rage, until it becomes something monstrous. This doesn't excuse what Berenice did. Nothing can excuse the deliberate murder of children, but it explains how someone who once held newborn babies with love and tenderness could grow into someone capable of poisoning those same children decades later. The real horror of this case isn't just that it happened, it's how preventable it was. At dozens of points over 23 years, someone could have chosen truth over lies, justice over convenience, healing over vengeance. The Catholic Church could have investigated the domestic violence allegations independently. The community could have demanded accountability instead of accepting easy scapegoating. The family could have told the truth and faced consequences instead of destroying an innocent woman's life. Instead, they chose the path that felt easier in the moment, but led to unthinkable tragedy in the end. Berenice Volkov will die in prison, and she deserves to. But she won't be the last person driven to monstrous acts by systematic injustice. She won't be the last person abandoned by communities that create their own predators through willful blindness and moral cowardice. The children who died at that birthday party were innocent victims of a war they didn't even know was being fought. Their deaths should remind us that every injustice we ignore, every vulnerable person we abandon, every comfortable lie we choose over difficult truth plants seeds that might grow into horrors we can't imagine. Because monsters aren't born in vacuum. They're created by all of us, one small betrayal at a time. And somewhere, in communities across the country, other Berenice Volkovs are writing names in notebooks, planning revenge against people who destroyed their lives and then forgot they existed. The only question is whether we'll recognize them before they decide that justice delayed has become justice served cold. If this case left you shaken and questioning how well you know the people around you, make sure to subscribe and join our community of true crime enthusiasts who aren't afraid to confront the darkest corners of human nature. For even more disturbing cases that reveal the monsters hiding in plain sight, check out our books, The Killer's Mind, Psychology Behind Shocking Murders, and Too Disturbing for YouTube, 7 Shocking Murder Stories by Mike Darren Boyle. Both are available now for the price of a coffee, and the links are in the description below, because sometimes understanding evil is the only way to prevent it. The birthday cake that was meant to celebrate life became an instrument of death. The woman who once helped bring children into the world became the one who took them out of it. And a community that thought they could bury their sins learned that some graves aren't deep enough to contain the monsters they create. This is the story of what happens when society fails its most vulnerable members. This is what revenge looks like when it's allowed to ferment for decades. This is the price we all pay when we choose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. And in a maximum security prison cell, Berenice Volkov sits writing letters that will never be sent, serving a sentence that will never end, paying a price that can never balance the scales of what she took from the world. Because some actions can't be undone, some words can't be taken back, and some choices echo through generations, poisoning everything they touch. Just like birthday cake on a spring afternoon that should have been filled with laughter instead of screams.